thought the future would be cooler. I thought the future would be cooler.
Welcome back to Learning is the New Working, a podcast series brought to you by the Learning Futures Group. I'm Chris Pirrie, and I'll be your host for a wonderful set of conversations with some leading-edge practitioners in fields related to the future of workplace learning. As you know, we'll explore topics like neuroscience, software engineering, social science, the future of work, learning technology, and design thinking. We'll meet academics, writers, chief learning officers, and CEOs who are working to redefine the workplace learning experience. I know we'll learn a lot, we'll push some boundaries, and I hope we'll have some fun, because the future of the workplace is likely uncertain, but absolutely must be cooler. In this episode, I'm excited to welcome Sam Herring to Learning is the New Working. Sam's an entrepreneur, a businessman, an innovator, a software developer, and in my opinion, a true learning leader. He runs the learning software startup Intrepid Learning and has been in the learning industry for his entire career. He graduated from Harvard with a degree in divinity and co-founded the first instantiation of the company, providing learning services to a small aerospace manufacturer that you might associate with Seattle. Intrepid then went on a bold and courageous journey, as the name might suggest, through several funding rounds and at least 2 acquisitions. Like me, Sam was the chairman of the Association for Talent Development, ATD. He has a broad network worldwide across the learning and development community and really done some deep thinking about the space. In full disclosure, Intrepid is our season sponsor for the podcast. We're very grateful for their support, but you should check them out at www.intrepidlearning.com and find out about their innovation in the workplace learning space. So let's listen in to my conversation with Sam Herring.
I thought the future would be cooler.
Welcome to Learning is the New Working. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chris. Delighted to have the conversation today.
Great. Well, we're happy to have you on the show and get some of your insights into the current state of workplace learning. As you've worked in this space for a few years now, you've built a really strong, admirable network of learning leaders, and you've got sort of true hands-on experience of corporate learning and the ecosystems around it. But today I thought for our listeners we'd focus on a couple of areas of your work, if you don't mind.
That sounds perfect.
Great. So I think 2 things. First, I want to talk a little bit about your life as a learning technology entrepreneur at a time when the startup culture is so vibrant. And secondly, we'll talk a little bit, from your perspective as an astute observer of workplace learning across multiple industries. As usual, we're going to start with a fairly quick-fire round of questions to sketch a picture for our listeners of your work practice. So are you ready to go?
I'm ready to roll.
Great. Okay, so Sam, why don't you tell me what part of the world do you live and work in, and how come you ended up there?
I live in Seattle, up here in the far northwest corner of the United States, and grew up about an hour away in Olympia, which is the capital of the state.
Uh-huh.
It was a pretty comfortable place to grow up, and in the early days, we didn't have Amazon. Microsoft was a twinkle in the eye. But on the other hand, Seattle has always been a boom town. And so you and I, Chris, both work here in Pioneer Square, which is, where the original Skid Row came from. And so we've had kind of, booms in our blood here in the Northwest. So I think we think about it today, it's sort of been reimagined as the tech boom. And it makes sense in its own special way here in the Northwest. So it's a great place to be.
Yeah, it is. I agree with you. It's a great place to be. I'm a big fan of Seattle, and also an incredible ecosystem of companies here now, and historically as well. Another sort of personal question around your learning practice. We always like to ask our guests what they studied and where they studied and why. What was your college experience, Sam?
Yeah, so it may not be the most direct path to learning technologist, but I studied American history at Yale as an undergrad, and with a focus on history of the American West. And I originally thought I was interested in the social sciences, but I found myself constrained by thinking of everything as a model and trying to describe people and society and events according to models. And history kind of opened my mind to the power of individual stories. And so that was really exciting. And then I continued my studies at Harvard in graduate school, where I studied religious ethics and social policy. And somehow with that, I found myself looking for gainful employment after my studies. So that's what I studied. Yeah.
Well, all those skills and capabilities seem increasingly more relevant in a world where we're thinking about the philosophy of work and the ethics of robotics and so on and so forth. So this is all good stuff you have there in your background, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
One last question on the sort of personal front, and that is around your sort of mission statement. I mean, you've been in, as we've said, this industry for a long time. Do you have a mission statement, sort of personal mission statement?
Well, before you asked the question, I didn't, but I had to think about it. So I would guess, and this is not going to be very polished, but something like to help others reach their potential and to be hopeful and thrive amidst change.
Hopefulness.
Something like that, because I think hopefulness is incredibly important amidst what we're all enduring these days.
Yeah, fair, absolutely fair point. Sam, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the business of learning here. I've heard you say that you believe learning should be a transformation lever for companies and organizations. Can you share a little bit what you mean by that thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. So, organizations, everyone knows, organization society going through massive changes due to the pace of technological change and globalization. And one example of that, a recent research from MIT and Deloitte show that something like 90% of organizations recognize they're under a threat of digital disruption, but less than half believe that they're adequately preparing for it. And so the challenge is compounded because we're not really wired biologically to keep up with this kind of pace of change. We've all in the past, change has been rolled out, has happened much slower. And so we're having to keep pace with this acceleration of changes, as Friedman talks about in his book, Thank You for Being Late.
Yeah.
And so organizations have to adapt to this and both help people accelerate change, and then their own organizations are having to drive change faster. So learning becomes this lever to build people's individual capacity to change, and then collectively from the organization to build their capacity to change.
Cool. So a culture of learning just kind of helps prepare people for this extraordinary period of time we're on, where change is happening very rapidly. What do you think about? One of the things I'm really fascinated in is what's going on in the venture capital space with learning at the moment. I know you've seen some views on this, and we've talked about the fact that we have our share of unicorns in the learning market, whether it's Udacity or Pluralsight and others. But we're seeing record VC investments in the learning space. What do you think's going on here, Sam? Do you have a perspective on that?
Well, I guess the cynical view would be that we've had soft money policy, so there's just tons of investment dollars has to go somewhere. But I think there's more to it than that. That's a key part of it. But the other part is, if we think about this digital transformation, digital disruption that we're all experiencing, that's putting this pressure on developing 21st century digital and human skills. And investors are seeing that there's opportunity to invest into that thesis. What's amazing to me, and this has been validated by research from organizations like Matari here in the Seattle area, is the amount of dollars that's accelerated in the last few years. For example, in the last 20 years, there's been almost $40 billion invested into educational technology companies, with 60% of that coming in the last 3 years alone. So that's fascinating. And the other fascinating aspect is that that for the first time in 2017, the plurality of that investment was going into consumer learning, more than corporate, more than K-12, more than higher ed. So there's just it's a fascinating trend, and that we can talk about that more about why consumer learning is the focus, which has some fascinating implications.
So just to clarify here, I mean, I know that for a long time there's been an investment in sort of school-oriented learning technology. That's been very much a focus of the VC investments. But you're saying not even just a shift to enterprise, but actually to the consumer type of learning. Do you have any examples of that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, things like I think it's all related to the blurring lines between adult learning as a continuous learning enterprise. So like we're having to take responsibility for our own careers in the context of gig economy. So we're all consumers of learning now. And so things like master class, where you can learn from the world's best. You can learn acting from Steve Martin, for example.
Yes.
Things like, of course, like Coursera, like Udacity. So it's blurring the lines between what is my work learning versus my individual learning, and really they're becoming the same thing in the context of a gig and a contingent economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think many people don't have a sort of traditional employer relationship, or maybe they have several employers, or you and I have talked about Uber drivers or people who are deriving their income from sort of third-party organizations, and it sets up a whole new dynamic for how people invest in their workplace learning. Very, very interesting. Do you think people on this topic a little bit? Do you think people are getting more used to paying for learning? For a long period of time, it was very difficult to monetize online learning. Where do you think things are on that?
I do. I think if the source is of demonstrated high quality and is differentiated, we're seeing that there's no shortage of appetite to pay. But people are very practical. They want demonstrated outcomes. They want to gain most often a measurable skill that they're going to get from that. And in the case of boot camp type organizations, they want to get a job out of that. So yeah, I think the paying for learning is people are seeing it's just a necessity.
Good. So the expectations around paying are increasing, but the expectations around what you get for that are also increasing too. This an interesting sort of dynamic for us in the learning space. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. One observation that I've had over the last 6-8 months, as I've been out and about talking to a lot of people, is what it takes to become a software vendor has really changed a lot. And there's this notion of if you can get two developers together and you have an idea for a feature, the barriers to entry are really low, thanks to the fact that you can access this incredible software and hardware infrastructure from vendors like Microsoft's Azure and Amazon Web Services. And I sort of think I see a lot of tiny little companies popping up with one very cool idea that they can get to market really easily. Have you seen this phenomena? What's your take on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it just seems like we have competitors to our business popping up left and right, and oftentimes, a prospective client will say, have you thought of, what do you think of this company? And usually I know who they are, but sometimes you just get these out of the blue, that you've never heard of. So it's interesting. I think it's never been easier to start these businesses and create software and deliver these because of cloud services, like you said, Chris. And I think that's awesome for innovation. I think it's going to come from all different parts of the world and so on. And the democracy of crowdsourcing this technology, building technology is all great. But I don't think it's quite that simple because, I mean, there are these things called network effects, right? And so the advantages are going to go to the larger players, one. And second, just because someone can build an